minutes up as we go. Welcome, everybody. We're going to give it another minute just to let a few other people trickle in here, and then we'll get started. All right. So thank you all for joining. Appreciate you carving time out in your evening. I just lost internet not 10 minutes ago. And so I'm leaning heavily on Will and Elizabeth, who's working some of the backroom audio-visual tech on our end. If I start to get choppy, feel free to raise your hand or let me know. And I'll probably just punt over to Will for a little bit. But for now, my phone hotspot seems to be doing the trick. Thank you all for joining. I'll just give a quick intro of myself. I'll pass it over to Will to give a quick intro of himself, and then we'll dive right into the agenda and the outline here. And the overarching hope is to do about 40 minutes of content sharing. It might drift a little bit past that, but we do want to save some time for questions at the end. So if you do have questions along the way, feel free to add them in the Q&A box or in the chat. All right, so John Delury, I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Senior Regional Director for Vote Solar out of our Midwest office. So we're based out of Chicago. We cover a few different states, but Illinois has been the lion's share of our work in a lot of different respects, in part because of the ongoing energy implementation and regulatory work, and in part because of the push for this big law that just passed, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. And so I'll add some disclaimers and caveats in just a second, but by way of background, Vote Solar, we're a national solar and climate justice advocacy organization. We like to think of ourselves as experts in the world of solar policy, but often we lean heavily on friends and partners and other groups along the way. So on my end, being relatively new to the regulatory space, I remember what it was like to hear all the acronyms and have my head spin around in circles as I tried to get acclimated to that space and come to better understand how these different proceedings and processes all interacted. And so part of the hope here is to provide that download and to pass that along to you all. Well, I'll turn it over to you for an intro, and then we'll dig right in.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Will Kenworthy. I'm the Midwest Regulatory Director for Vote Solar. So I'm sort of John's counterpart in the regulatory space. I manage our interventions in various regulatory proceedings around the region, and we focus in Illinois, Minnesota, and Michigan, but I've been also participating in commission proceedings in Indiana and Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, and Wisconsin. And
because I know Will won't say it, I don't fully know how Will does all the things he does, but he's intervening simultaneously in 6 or 7 different cases and has kept his eye on the ball in Illinois in a lot of different ways. So he's a wealth of information and lucky to have his expertise as we dive in to the Illinois energy implementation landscape. So just as a high level overview, we're going to do a little bit of level setting about what this is and what this isn't. And fun fact, I'll probably be asking some of you to log off by the next slide, just to make sure that this is as helpful as possible to you all. We'll go through a few definitions and some acronyms. We'll talk a little bit about the overall landscape of different agencies and departments, kind of how they function, what makes them tick, what might move them, and give that download on some of the key players within the energy and the renewable energy space in particular. And we'll kind of intersperse all this with some case studies, 2 from Illinois and 1 from Michigan, about the regulatory process and different ways to kind of nudge it in the right direction. So this is that slide I warned you about. What tonight's webinar is designed to be a high-level overview, pretty much at the ground level, of what different stakeholders get involved with the regulatory process in Illinois and who makes which decisions, and also to present a bit of a menu of options for different ways that different groups have gotten involved in the past. But what this isn't is a download of everything that's in the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. I'll just do this as like a pitch for next time around that, we are combing our way through that. We are starting to build out lists of deadlines and sequences that are going to be upon us quicker than we think. But tonight is just to really set that foundation upon which we'll build that next webinar's content around like what comes next. What are these deadlines? What are these different specific processes? And how does that overlay with this landscape that we'll discuss tonight? So we're actually probably going to build out like a glossary of terms for folks who are less familiar with this space and just have that as a living document. These are some acronyms that you encounter all the time throughout this process and as you start to look more at implementation. But if Will or I use other acronyms or other descriptions that you're unfamiliar with, again, please just ping us in the chat or in the questions and answers, and we'll address it and add it to that ongoing glossary that we're building out. But just wanted to spell these out, and then we try to spell them out as we go as well. So I'm going to take a first stab at this, and then I'm going to turn it over to Will. Will and I are going to be bouncing off of each other a whole bunch this presentation. We decided to take a slightly less formal approach to the classic webinar format. So I'd consider us your hosts, but maybe not your navigators, and we'll just figure this out together as we go. So what is implementation? Like, what is regulatory work? The crux of this is that legislation is often vague, and a lot of times that's on purpose, right? Like legislators aren't going to have the skills or the insights they need to get to a certain level of granularity that program implementation actually requires. And so a lot of items in the bill, in any bill, but certainly seen in the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, is like this will be determined through such and such agency or such and such department. And it creates the framework of making that decision, but ultimately the finesse, the details, the fine print is hammered out in the regulatory process. And so ultimately, like a lot of times after the bill is passed, after the big fun flash of passage and signature and celebration fades, it all kind of takes place, not behind closed doors because they're not necessarily shut, but certainly under the radar and away from a lot of the folks who know this work well and are determined to get involved in these decision-making processes. Well, anything I've missed in terms of that basic level setting?
Nope, so far so good. Wouldn't add anything there.
So here's a little menu of different entities that are referenced in the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. Some of these probably look very familiar. Some of them, for all of you who are familiar with this landscape, you might wonder how the hell it made its way into the bill and what possible role they could play in implementation. There are a few entities in particular that we'll be tracking over the course of this webinar. And that is not to say that these other agencies or departments won't play a role in figuring all this out and getting us to this clean and equitable energy future. It is to say that we have the most expertise in the ICC and the IPA, so we're just going with what we know. And a whole lot of decisions were put in their lap as part of this bill. And then we added DCEO in there. As you'll see once we get to that, that's kind of a brave new world for us. We're less familiar with the work that they do, but wanted to shout them out here because they have been given a lot of tasks along the way. And so obviously, these are all going to play a role at some point or another. But again, this webinar and most of Vote Solar's work will probably focus more in on these three key entities. So here comes the IPA. The Illinois Power Agency is an independent agency that essentially exists to figure out a number of different elements of our renewable energy processes and programs. They're fairly recent, a creation to get us to these renewable energy procurement programs and to start looking at statewide procurements. And they are under the oversight of the Executive Ethics Commission. Ultimately, their plans, and in particular their long-term renewable resources procurement plan, is approved by the ICC, but they are an independent agency. They function fully separately, and it's a bunch of really smart people trying to figure out how to put meat on the bones of very complex legislation. So these are their functions. There's a lot of text on here, and I do really want to highlight these last two bullet points. I added these two just to remind us all that the IPA does a whole lot of different things, and a lot of it often just takes place without people watching too closely. But these two will have direct and ongoing impacts on how this next phase of the energy policy landscape unfolds. One is that long-term renewable resources procurement plan. The other is just their ongoing role to help administer the Adjustable Block Program and the Illinois Solar for All program. The Adjustable Block Program being essentially all of the distributed, smaller solar programs. It includes rooftop solar, includes community solar, and it now includes a few other sub-programs, the new Solar Schools program, the community-owned community solar program, and the new equity eligible contractor sub-program. All sits within the Adjustable Block Program. And the Illinois Solar for All program includes a few different sub-programs, namely the low-income residential, the new low-income multifamily residential, or the multifamily unit, the community solar, and the nonprofit and public facility sub-program. Will, you spent more time with the plan, all things said and done. I wrote in, this is where the magic happens. Maybe I'll ask you to speak to if that's actually the case.
Yeah, I wanted to just, while we're talking about the IPA, just take a little bit of a step back and just also explain that the IPA exists basically to administer programs that the legislature set up, and generally all of the renewable programs, but they also do energy procurement. So if you're get your electricity, say you're a ComEd customer, if you have an option of getting your residential service directly from ComEd for your energy supply service, and if you do, then the IPA is also the one who's procuring that on the open market, and that is what they procure annually for ComEd, for default customers of ComEd and Ameren and Mid-American, is a lot. It's a lot of energy. It's a big deal, and so they have a significant responsibility. And then in 2016, when we passed the Adjustable Block Program and started the renewable energy procurements under the current mechanism, the IPA was given that authority as well. And so what the long-term renewable resources plan governs, it's a legislatively required plan that the IPA does every 2 years. It says this is how we're going to administer both the large utility scale competitive procurements for renewable energy and the Adjustable Block Program, which includes all of the distributed generation programs that we mostly think about when we're thinking about solar here. So the long-term renewable resources plan, keep in mind, includes both the utility scale solar and it includes all of the distributed generation or rooftop and community solar plans also. And so the first one under CEJA, under the last act, came out in a couple of years after 2016. I guess it was finally approved in late 2018, and we opened the program in 2019. Not late, mid 2018, and they're supposed to update it every 2 years. And so since it was last approved in 2019, the IPA had started a new draft, a new proceeding to consider an update to the long-term renewable resources procurement plan. But they, a couple of days ago, after enactment of the bill and after the bill was signed, they withdrew the previous plan and announced a process for how they're going to rewrite a new plan, submit it to the Illinois Commerce Commission for approval. And we'll talk more about that later. But right now, just think of this long-term renewable resources procurement plan is their plan for administering these programs.
Yeah, and actually that reminds me, I think just maybe an hour or two ago, the IPA announced a series of webinars, and these might be of particular interest to this audience. So we'll follow up with an email for those who may not have caught that live, but I believe they're doing 6 or 7 lunch hour webinars or workshops to help stakeholders understand how these different elements of the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act are going to unfold. So again, it's a testament to how much work they have ahead of them. It's also a testament to them continuing to try to find ways to make this process more accessible. So I'll follow up with the link to that registration if folks are interested in getting in on that drumbeat. And honestly, I probably won't join all 7. I'll probably try to just pick the ones that are most relevant. And I encourage you to develop that interest and that expertise and dive in wherever you can. So this is courtesy of a good friend, Milena, at the Environmental Law and Policy Center. Wanted to give credit where it's due, because this was a lot of really beautiful work for something that ended up not happening, which is probably ringing through the IPA's ears right now too. As Will said, they were en route because of these deadlines from CEJA to issue a new plan, and they did issue a new plan almost exactly 1 month before this new law was signed by the governor. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the long-term plan, because honestly, my biggest takeaway from this is one of the single most impactful things anybody who's watching this process can do is to try to provide feedback early on in the creation of the long-term plan. And there's a lot of different ways to get involved, and we'll talk about some of those, but to weigh in, to go to the workshops that the IPA is hosting, to look at the different requests for comments that they issue. This is going to actually bend the creation of these programs in a lot of different ways. So I'll breeze through this. I suspect you all have already skimmed it if you have the screen share in front of you. And I know a few folks are not able to see the screen, but ultimately the IPA has traditionally held some workshops with a request for comment. Although again, it's not required by law. It is something that they have decided to do, and it is a great opportunity. They will read those comments that users submit. They will publish a draft revised plan. So that's something that we anticipate coming along the line here at some point. You do have a comment period on that draft plan to try to have this public hearing moment per utility. It's not quite enough, but it is a good opportunity when that pops up. And then the plan gets filed. And this graphic actually does a good job of showing where it's really easy to get involved and to have your voice heard, and where it becomes a little bit more involved. Not necessarily trickier, but certainly more of a commitment. And the distinction here is essentially between public comment, stakeholder engagement, and an official process at the Illinois Commerce Commission that requires, or at least strongly incentivizes, people to find lawyers and officially and formally intervene in the process. So you may have heard terms like interveners and intervention, this is just that moment when it switches to this much more controlled, formal process of engaging back and forth with these regulators about official and often contested issues. So things that are kind of bouncing back and forth. So I'm gonna, well, Will, anything else in that schedule before I move too far past it?
No, we'll get to the discussion of the ICC. And there's a couple of points that I wanted to add in when we get there, but for now, for the discussion of the plan, I think we're on track.
Okay, that makes sense. And honestly, this case study is kind of pre-intervention anyways. So I'll just go through this and highlight some of the recent, albeit somewhat temporary, successes of influencing this ghost plan that was just filed and unfiled in the last month or so. But ultimately, like, the IPA holds workshops. They held 3 workshops in June. I'm sure a lot of people on this call participated in one way or another. And for those who missed it, you've got another chance with these 7 webinars coming up. But they hold these workshops. They try to make them as accessible as possible. They try to break them into different fields of expertise and key topics that will be discussed. They do inevitably get somewhat wonky and in the weeds, but it is an important opportunity to learn from these programs and to ask questions along the way. So the Illinois Power Agency will make themselves available to answer questions as you go. They'll then issue that request for comments that I mentioned. In this case, the Illinois Solar for All Working Group submitted a series of comments that really focused heavily on reforming that program and making it work where it had, in some cases, failed, especially on the distributed generation subprogram. And we think that there was room for improvement, and we made those thoughts clear. And then the IPA issues a draft plan. So this is before any of the official processes outlined in the law begin. The IPA issues a draft plan, which had incorporated a fair amount of the feedback that we had provided as part of this somewhat informal stakeholder group called the Illinois Solar for All Working Group. So this is what you get, is this, probably 700, 800 page document about these programs and all these different policies. And it's compared to the prior version, so you can figure out how successful you were in altering the plan as it has been developed. And these are a few changes that we noticed in the final plan. It's not like things are referenced directly to the Illinois Solar for All Working Group. There might be a certain amount of correlation and causation, but ultimately, a lot of the proposals that this working group made, a lot of the suggestions that were just compiled in a relatively informal letter to the Illinois Power Agency were accepted and were adopted. And the trick here is this: you don't have to find a working group. You don't have to engage in some big, broad process. If you have thoughts about a policy that the Illinois Power Agency runs, you can let them be known. Like, there are ways of just emailing them your thoughts or your concerns, and that is part of this stage of the process. It's not the big, scary, formal thing that I think a lot of other stages of the processes are perceived to be, and sometimes are. This is a very easy way for different groups to get engaged, is by throwing comments towards the program creators as they're creating the program, and to try to have that feedback incorporated. So
just a pro tip that I would add in here is, if you're considering participating in this way, that on the IPA website, in previous instances of this, where they've had workshops or solicited informal comment and feedback, they usually post that on the website, and you can go to the website and look back at the last round of, in fact, of this last draft that they offered. We actually did offer one round of comments on the draft plan, and you can go and look at what those comments look like, and you can see they range from 40-page opuses drafted by the usual suspect advocates like us, or there you'll see, 1 or 2 page things, or even a couple of paragraphs that someone emailed into the IPA that the IPA will take into consideration and post publicly. It does not take a full. You can talk about only what you want to talk about. If there's only one issue in this 200-page document that you really want to express yourself on, you can write about that one issue, and that's all. You don't have to talk about everything in the whole plan. The barrier to entry is very low. And there are good examples out there of that.
Yep, exactly. Thanks, Will. All right, well, I'm going to toss it back over to you, I think, and you can take us on a wild ride through the Illinois Commerce Commission.
Who is the ICC? So the Illinois Commerce Commission is one of, every state has a commission of some sort that regulates various previously regulated businesses. The Illinois Commerce Commission still regulates railroad crossings, I think, and some aspects of what remains of local telecommunication service. But they also regulate, and they spend a lot of their time and effort on regulating electric utilities. And specifically what's left of that after we've spun out competitive retail electric supply is distribution services that the ComEd, Ameren, and Mid-American provide. The commission is appointed by the governor, and there are certain requirements about the partisan makeup of the commission. No more than a certain number of members can be from one party. So it will consist of Democrat, Republican, and usually independents. And there are 5 members appointed by the commission, or appointed by the governor. And currently there are 4 appointed. There is 1 vacancy on the commission, and that's something that we and other interested parties are going to be looking at, because it probably, given the huge amount of information that the commission is going to be processing in the next year or 2 years, having a full complement of members to share the workload is going to be important. So right now, those are the 4 members of the commission. We would expect another commissioner to be appointed soon. You want to move on?
Yeah, go for it.
So the commission is, our animation's not working. But the commissioners are independent and serve as their own sort of bosses, and they will each have 1 or 2 staff to help them sort through issues. But there's also a staff of the commission that is consists of a bunch of different kinds of professionals who serve different functions and help the commission make decisions. The administrative law, you'll see there's 2 sort of parts of the organization that John's highlighted here, and that's the Bureau of Public Utilities and the Administrative Law Judge section. The administrative, let me back up. The Illinois Commerce Commission serves 2 different kinds of roles. They do 2 different kinds of things. Both are important in the way that they regulate the utilities. One is a sort of a quasi-legislative function, where the Illinois Commerce Commission or the legislature says, okay, we want you to implement this kind of program. Utilities, here's what you need to do to comply with this law. And the Commerce Commission will then go, the ICC will then go out and say, okay, well, this is what the legislature told you to do. This is what we need to see to show that you're complying with the law. So they'll set either rules or orders that sort of set the stage for what is expected of the utilities in their behavior. Then there's a different part of the commission staff, which consists of administrative law judges. And the administrative law judges carry out the business of the commission as it's related to its quasi-judicial function. And by that, I mean, that they are making decisions about whether or not rules that they promulgate or proposals that the utilities make comply with the statute. And those are very formal proceedings. It looks and feels a lot like a courtroom a lot of times. And there are rules of procedure and rights that parties have, and also obligations that parties have. And all of those quasi-judicial proceedings happen under the guidance of an administrative law judge who sort of runs the proceeding like a judge would run a court trial. So that's pretty much all I had to say about that.
And I think it's super helpful to break that like into two core functions, because in some cases, the ICC as approver, like focusing in on that functionality helps to understand the IPA as well. Because the IPA and their long-term renewable resources procurement plan, like, at the end of that diagram that we pointed out, as it approaches the head of that snake, the last thing they want is to have their plan denied by the Illinois Commerce Commission. So they are going to do everything in their power to write a plan and to figure out the details of the programs that is going to pass by the ICC's like firewall of ensuring that it complies with the statute. So in some cases, this does make for a relatively cautious IPA in looking at the different programs and trying to figure out how to interpret statute to the letter and perhaps not to the spirit in all cases, because that is their job. They are designed to figure out what the legislation means, to translate that into the detailed, fleshed out version of the long-term plan, and to get it to pass by the Illinois Commerce Commission as they go.
Just procedurally, the way that this will work in the context of this chart is that the IPA will submit their plan to the to the ICC, and it will go into one of these quasi-judicial proceedings. It's what we call a contested case. And the ICC will create a docket, which is a case. And there, at that point, there will be, people will submit testimony, and there will be opportunities for expert witnesses to make a case about whether or not the plan that the IPA came up with comports with the statute. And not only will we intervene and participate in that as a party to the case, but the utilities get a swing at it too, and the Attorney General will take a swing at it and gets to talk about that too. So there's a lot of interest. Any interest is eligible to apply for standing to participate in these contested cases. And the utilities take it very seriously, and they have a lot of lawyers who get paid a lot of money to go through every little bit of this and ensure that it meets their needs and meets the requirements of the statute.
Yeah, and it does create like a bit of a David and Goliath feel when you're up against utilities that have a whole lot of resources and lawyers at their disposal. But I think the trick is, as we'll see in a case study in just a second, is to find a whole bunch of other Davids and to see if you can have enough like thought, resources, and leadership on one side to outweigh the other. You want to pick any of this apart, Will, or should we just move on to the case study?
I mean, this was sort of a bigger context. What we're talking about, the renewable procurement plans and the adjustable block program, are only one part of the really big picture about what the utilities do. And what the utilities mainly do is transmit and distribute electricity, and make sure that the wires that are running from the transmission system to your house are up and running and are reliable and safe, and have the capacity to do what we as a society want the grid to do. And so and that's very expensive, right? And that's so this whole process of how much they spend when, for a couple of years, the last several years, they've had essentially a blank check to do what they wanted to do. We're getting into a much more, there'll be a lot more just like looking into the way that the utilities are talking about and thinking about how they spend their money and for what in the next couple of years. And so that's going to be a big part of CEJA implementation. But it's also the main part of what the ICC does with regard to the utility. So you should keep in mind that this is only a part, what we're talking about, the renewables part of it is only a part of, you know, the whole relationship that the utilities have with the commission.
And if this hasn't become clear yet, as we keep talking about how we're taking a piece of a piece of a piece, you got to just grab a piece and hold on for dear life. Because if you take on the entire bill and all the different moving pieces, it can add up really quickly.
Yeah.
And Will, I can tell you're chomping at the bit to share some good news about the multi-year rate plans and the distribution system planning, but this will be another just teaser for next time around.
Yeah.
Yeah, we covered most of this.
Yep.
Okay, quick case study. Let me click through and then I'll pass over to you, Will, to talk about the intervener side of things. So this is, I feel like docket and intervener should go to our glossary. Those are words that got tossed around a lot without often explaining what they are. But this is the specific example that a lot of you are probably familiar with or remember of when Ameren, Illinois, tried to demonstrate the lengths to which they would go to eliminate choices for customers to go solar, to get rooftop solar. And more directly, they were fighting to essentially end net metering, the policy that supports customers getting fair compensation for the energy they produce from their little rooftop solar power plant. And they were just trying to pull the rug out from that whole program and therefore the whole industry and everything therein. So here's the David versus Goliath side of things. Well, you want to chat a little bit about like what it is to be an intervening party, or what role like the joint NGOs or these other parties played behind the scenes?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just sort of set the stage here. What happened in this particular case was Ameren said they had hit a particular threshold that was going to trigger a whole bunch of things that would have eventually led to the end of net metering. And they said that they had hit that trigger, that threshold, because of a way that they calculated a certain complicated thing from the statute. And we said, well, we're going to get involved in this case, but also, by the way, we don't think you actually hit that threshold. We think you calculated it wrong. And we intervened along with the Environmental Law and Policy Center and the NRDC as the joint non-governmental organizations. And at the same time, CEJA, ICEA, and CCSA intervened as they call themselves the Joint Solar Party. So we had two groups that were we basically aligned on our interpretations of these things, and we ended up working very closely together through this whole process. Although we made slightly different points at different times, and I think that contributed to a better decision, and it let the administrative law judge know that there was a lot of support technically for what we were doing. But there was also, John's going to talk about these non-interveners who and how they were able to input and affect the process, and that's a model that I think we're hoping to work on going forward. And I should just point out at the same time, there were other parties here. We highlighted the ones that we worked most closely with, but the Attorney General's office was also a party, and we coordinated with them. And I think the Citizens Utility Board was an intervener in this case also, although they didn't provide any testimony. But there was a lot of people involved, and intervening means we had a lawyer, the Environmental Law Policy Center representing us, go and tell the administrative law judge that we should have standing to be admitted to be a party in the proceeding. And the utilities had the option to oppose the intervention, but in this case they didn't. We've had interventions opposed before, but in this case they didn't. And so we became a formal party to the investigation. And like I said, that gives us certain rights and also certain obligations in terms of how the proceeding goes.
And I'll just add one quick note, which is that I understand this threshold calculation issue that Will just outlined, but I also can call Will and bother him anytime I'd like. This is often very complex stuff that is taking place at the margins of expertise, and that process should be more accessible. And I think there are steps we can take to make it more accessible and more approachable. There's also a lot of ways to get involved that don't require filing and joining an official intervention party or finding a lawyer to intervene on your behalf. And that's what I wanted to really lift up relatively quickly here, which is just all of the groundswell of activity that erupted in downstate Illinois to try to protect net metering. And so what you can see here is Kirsten Sheets, who got engaged both at press events and preparing public comment at an Illinois Commerce Commission meeting on the topic to share her point of view about why this was going to be so damaging to the industry and to the customers, and why she believed that this was the wrong idea. And she didn't have to bring out a whiteboard and describe why it should be at 3% instead of 5%. It's really important to just have this so what out there in the open, because the Illinois Commerce Commission, they might not be elected, they might be appointed by the governor, they might have a different type of job security than a legislator, but they still care very much about their reputation, and they certainly want to feel like they're doing the right thing. And so the more outside pressure that builds on a specific issue and that helps to draw attention to how important and significant this is, the better. And so a whole bunch of other stakeholders dove in. There was a good amount of press around this. I think there were over 1,000 public comments that were submitted on this docket. And these are just people, again, not weighing in on the calculation, but just talking about how important the right decision is here. I'm going to breeze through DCEO because I do want to pull up and see if there's any questions or anything that we can address at the end. The long story short on DCEO is we have a lot to learn about the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. We know that they have the right teams to implement a lot of the elements of this new bill that is no longer going to be the utilities job and is now being brought back into the fold of the state and state government. So for those of you who have breezed through the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, you will see Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity jump off the page in a few different places, especially around workforce and contractor development programs and some of the grant and seed funding programs. So again, I'll admit that Vote Solar and John Delury we're less familiar with the DCEO structure, but I think we're prepared to get much more familiar and to figure out where are those long-term plan processes on the DCEO side? Where are those opportunities for different groups to dig their teeth in and figure out how to weigh in and to bend these programs in the right direction?
And I would say that they are less a quasi-judicial agency than the ICC and to an extent the IPA, and so it's more amenable to direct stakeholder input.
Yep, that's a great point.
All the rigors of contested case proceedings.
Yeah, and I think it's Well, I'm not even sure if you made this point during the ICC session, but one thing you'll notice on this chart is there's a whole bunch of vacancies. And we know that all of these entities are going to be stretched really thin. IPA, ICC, DCEO, and they need a lot of really smart, really dedicated people really quickly. And honestly, one of the best things we could probably be doing at the moment is trying to help identify some of those people and encourage them to just stay glued to the job boards at DCEO and to keep their eyes peeled for IPA hiring announcements, because we're going to need a lot of new capacity to figure out how all of this works and how the different pieces come together. So again, I think we'll actually talk more about DCEO in the next webinar as we look at the different programs and policies that will come right out of DCEO and all these different offices. But for now, it's just sort of a stakeholder. Just wanted to give you a glimpse at that structure and what these different offices are. So stay with us because it's worth it. I know this isn't Illinois specific, and I know most of you are probably Illinois specific, but this is probably one of the most comprehensive, equitable, and inclusive stakeholder engagement efforts that I've seen, and kind of flip the script in a lot of ways of how this process of like interactions with regulators happens. So in the one corner, we've got DTE Energy, based out of Detroit, biggest utility in the state of Michigan, who was looking for approval on their big 15-year integrated resources plan. There's another acronym we didn't spell out. So the IRP is the integrated resources plan. We won't have that specific type of plan in Illinois, but we'll have something similar, again, as we'll talk about at some point here. On the other side, we have a whole bunch of groups who had intervened, and then we had sort of a different stakeholder who dove in pretty deep and got involved in the process as a formal intervener. And then again, we had a lot of other groups that were working on this case and tracking this docket from the outside looking in. So Will, do you actually just want to talk about like what this did or what the significance of having Solidarity intervene was?
So IRPs are, like John said, a way that the commission will look at the long-term plans for how the utility's getting its resources. And that it's not, like John said, it's not exactly, there's not an analogous situation here because we have competitive retail electric supply, but it's some of the important issues that people like to talk about and the communities and organizations got excited about, because it's like, are you going to keep that gas plant, or are you going to keep that coal plant, or are you going to shut it down? And are you going to replace it with a new gas plant, or are you going to replace it with more renewables and storage? And so, but historically in IRPs, it's been sort of the usual suspects, which is the regular old environmental groups that everyone, that always have participated in these things without so much of a focus on equity and access. And but in this case, an organization called Solidarity, which is based in a small part of a small town, independent municipality, but it's completely surrounded by Detroit. It's one of the lowest income per capita communities in the Detroit region. And there is a community group there called Solidarity, which wanted to get involved. And so had a lot to say about DTE's plan, and we're looking for a way to become formally involved rather than on the outside looking in. They wanted to participate in this contested case. And the University of Chicago's Abrams Law Clinic, which is an organization that, that's at the University of Chicago Law School, took up their case and represented them and enabled Solidarity to participate directly in that intervention. The other thing that happened in that case was, in parallel with the formal intervention, we had a broad campaign to provide public input to the commission for their consideration in a form that would be meaningful to the commission. And I think John will talk about some of the limitations on that going forward, or maybe this is going to end up at a different webinar, but this intervention became a sort of a model for what we hope to be able to work with people to make happen here.
Yeah, so like to just underline what Will just said, like this was somewhat unique, and I think it was a very welcome change of pace. So, there were a lot of groups like Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, Engage Michigan, who weren't interveners and didn't necessarily want to be. But for groups that do have interest in diving into those technical waters, who want to engage in that level, it's great to have folks like the Abrams Law Clinic at University of Chicago. Northwestern has a similar clinic. And frankly, Will, I know we have toyed with this idea, but it's worth starting to build out a list of where that representation might be, like who can provide legal representation to groups who want to dive in and chase something all the way through the intervention process. So I'm going to try to wrap this up, but this was the public hearing. I wasn't there, Will, I think you were. And, these are all of the commissioners who I think were there for 4 hours or so. So, heard from a lot of different people with a lot of different concerns, and people sort of brought whatever concerns spoke to them the most. And in some cases, they weren't directly relevant to the long-term plan, but it still was important to have that space to have those voices heard and to build this sense of importance of getting this long-term plan right. So this was a rally that took place outside as, the ICC equivalent of Michigan, the Michigan Public Service Commission, was deliberating. This was kind of a parallel process that we worked with a few other groups to try to create. You'll notice that, it doesn't say the IRP here, it says the 15-year plan. And here's the Solidarity logo on the back. This was an attempt to just draw more attention to how consequential this is, even though it seems super wonky, even though it takes place in the shadows. It is incredibly consequential for where these utility companies will go next. There's going to be a lot of processes like this about to happen in Illinois. And so this was the report card that we gave them. Vote Solar and all of the other intervening groups, including Solidarity, were asked to just crowdsource their grades. DTE is not especially well reviewed in this report card, as you can see. We believe they have a lot of room to improve. And
if they can read the what they got the A+ in.
Right, so the A+ is in lobbying against the public interest. DT has been in a lot of trouble, and there's a lot of really good groups that are fighting to make that better. There's the short story.
Oh, and we're making a difference with DTE too.
Yeah. So I think, can you all hear this? Can you hear this, Will?
I'll tell you in a second. Nope.
It makes me feel
Oh, there we go.
as
Yes.
DTE is on a mission to destroy our lives and our planet.
The air pollution specifically in Southwest Detroit, but a lot of the downriver communities are very disproportionately affected by the pollution from these factories. We know that there's all kind of cancer clusters in these neighborhoods. These neighborhoods are heavily people of color.
So I say you can't do that to people, especially people who are not able to fight back, that don't have the resources to fight back, not to put things in their communities that's going to bring them even worse health conditions than they're already facing.
Work for me, DTE.
So this kind of brings us to the last point of the evening, which is that the commission had that big hearing, but the underlying statute, that language that fueled this whole process and created this system of resource planning, it only required one hearing of the company, of the utility. And so groups got really creative about different ways of having those voices heard, of bringing those to the forefront, of sending them in the direction of the utility decision makers here at the commission. And the broader point that I think we're hoping to leave you with is that, like, in this case, while there were a lot of wins along the way, ultimately the MPSC, in my opinion, felt like their hands were tied, that this plan did hit the basic requirements of statute, of the legislation to be passed. And it's their job to decide if it hits the basic points of the legislation or not. They're not there to really go too far above or beyond, or to legislate beyond that framework that's created there. And so ultimately the larger victories were stymied by statute, which is why it's so important to get the statute right, which is kind of what tees us up for next webinar, to take a closer look at what we did get right here, what exciting times lie ahead as we try to navigate our way through a nearly 1,000-page bill. And as we figure out, like, what different pressure points and opportunities to influence this process might come on the horizon as part of implementing the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. Will, any final thoughts, any moments of Zen before we pivot?
No. I mean, I can hang around for a couple of minutes if people want to do questions. We do have one question in the Q&A too.
John, that's a great question. And
He's been waiting patiently with that one since we logged on, so.
I didn't even see
I feel like
this.
we should answer it.
Great question. Will, you want to take it?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, the bottom line is that I am confident in the long run this is going to be cheaper overall from a total system cost than the path we were on. But the way that CEJA was originally written, there was an important element of it, which was included a capacity market reform for the larger energy supply market, for the way that we buy competitive electricity in the state. The market for that is run by a regional transmission organization called PJM, and it's a little broken, and it favors fossil fuel. It favors incumbent interests, and it favors fossil fuels. And we did not fix that. If we would have, we not only is the mechanism that we use to do that a little screwy and favors fossil fuels, but is also, we buy a lot too much capacity. And so in the original CEJA, the original concept behind CEJA was that we were going to include a capacity market reform provision that was going to save us a lot of money on over procurement of capacity that would have offset some of the increased costs that would have resulted from expanding the renewable portfolio standard and the bailout ultimately that the nuclear plants got for the nukes. So yeah, that was what changed.
I'll just follow up quickly by saying that we did commission some modeling. Modeling is a term also thrown around a lot in this slice of the world, but it's essentially just doing as best of a job as we can of trying to predict how these different forces are going to interact, how these different plants might retire, in what sequence new clean energy generation is going to come online. And we, alongside a number of other groups, commissioned some modeling for Illinois. And it does show that there's a lot of savings, especially when you prioritize distributed energy resources. So if you imagine, that would include rooftop solar. It also includes a lot of demand response resources, a lot of like advanced grid technology. When you stop just focusing on building giant coal plants and expensive transmission line, you can unlock a whole bunch of savings. Everybody who is looking to go solar through FEJA and now through CEJA, they're going to be saving a boatload of money for themselves. So definitely going to be cheaper for them, for those who decide to participate in the adjustable block program or for the Illinois Solar for All program. But by putting a little power plant on their roof, they're also helping their little corner of the grid to be a little bit more resilient, to offset upgrades that might come at great expense down the road. And so the modeling that we did show significant savings from this change. But John, not to sound like we're dodging the question, the crux of it is that, customers will see a slight change in their energy bill. And that's to fund this critically important transition to the clean energy future. And there will be a lot of savings along the way, but there will be a couple bumps, just like we saw with CEJA in the electric bill.
In the long run, we need to address the market that we're in, and we will do that. And that's sort of next up on the list, but we need to capture some of the value that our neighbors are getting. Every place around us in Minnesota, Michigan, Indiana, where utilities, vertically integrated utilities who make long run decisions about where they're going to get their energy supply from, they are coming to the conclusion that renewable energy is cheaper than keeping existing fossil units running. And so they're closing those units and buying a lot of solar, mostly solar, a lot of wind also. And that's just the way it's happening in places where these long-term decisions are transparent and people can see them. And frankly, the utilities see that that's the best way for them to make money going into the future too. So they are replacing fossil generation with renewables, but we got some work to do here to make that happen. In the meantime, we've got, we've made a big stride with CEJA on the utility scale procurements, and we've really re-leveraged the ability of distributed energy resources to meet that part of the resource needs that they can.
Yep. Okay, I don't see any other questions coming in. And so my final thought is, it's easy to think about the costs. It's a little harder to imagine the benefits when they haven't fully unfolded yet. That will be next time as well. And that's when we get excited about all these different programs and policies that will emerge from this new world that we're trying to build. So thank you all for joining. I know we're a few minutes over, so sorry for keeping you. And hopefully we'll see a bunch of you next time towards the end of the month as we dive deep into the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. Thanks all.
Night all. Bye-bye.